June 28, 2008. Late afternoon on Water Street, Manhattan. Sirens slice the heat as a figure lies still below a 9th-floor balcony. 4 days before her 21st birthday, the Russian Rapunzel, a young woman whose hair and face looked borrowed from a fairy tale, has vanished from the world as suddenly as she appeared in it. She had been the industry's next obsession. British Vogue once called her a face to be excited about. She had graced glossy covers, floated through perfume commercials, and moved like a whisper through runways across New York and Paris. Officially, her death would be recorded as self-inflicted. Unofficially, it would become a riddle, one that her friends and family refused to accept. What happens when a life built to be seen disappears behind unanswered questions? What really happened to Ruslana Korshunova?
Almaty, Kazakhstan. A city caught between mountains and myths, where Soviet remnants brushed shoulders with modern glass towers. This was where Ruslana Korshunova was born in July 1987, a child of the steppes, with cheekbones shaped by centuries of wind and bone. Her father died when she was still a child, leaving a quiet mother and older brother to raise her. By all accounts, Ruslana was not a loud presence. She read poetry. She moved like water. She loved Russian literature, ballet, and wrote in journals with the solemnity of someone much older. Classmates remembered a girl who was kind but distant, and teachers described her as observant, like someone always half in another world. She never sought fame. She wasn't the type to storm into casting rooms or demand to be seen. If anything, her beauty was something she wore unknowingly, like sunlight on glass. That all changed at 15. A magazine in Germany ran an article on her local language club. It was a harmless feature, a group photo buried in the back pages. But one reader, Debbie Jones, a modeling scout for Models 1 in London, saw something no one else did. A profile in the crowd. A face that looked like it had stepped out of Slavic folklore and into high fashion. Within months, Ruslana was signed. Her first shoots came quickly. Her mother was skeptical, but the world was not. And the girl from Kazakhstan, who once spoke softly and lived modestly, was about to become the industry's loudest whisper. There are some faces that the camera doesn't just capture, it follows. Ruslana Korshunova's was one of them. When she arrived in London at 15, she had barely stepped into adulthood. But fashion doesn't wait for girls to grow up. Within weeks, Ruslana was booked for her first major editorial, a haunting fairy tale-inspired shoot for French Jalouse. Her hair, still untouched by trend or scissors, tumbled like honeyed silk past her waist. It wasn't just a look, it was a signature, and the industry took notice. Agencies across Europe scrambled for her. She moved with a delicate strength, as though she belonged on some distant cliffside more than a backstage fitting room. Casting directors whispered about her like she was a myth. She's not like the others, they said. She looks like she comes from another planet. One editor at Elle France reportedly called her a haunted doll, but with a heartbeat. Then came Vogue. The Russian and Polish editions placed her front and center, an unblinking stare framed by waterfall hair. But it wasn't just her looks. It was the way she stood still in chaos. While others chattered, she listened. While others performed, she embodied. She became a blank canvas that somehow never lost her own colors. By the time she was 17, Ruslana was working with Nina Ricci, Vera Wang, Kenzo, Paul Mitchell, and Dior. She walked for Marc Jacobs, filmed commercials in Prague, and flew from continent to continent on a passport inked with success. Designers loved her because she didn't just wear their clothes, she turned them into myth. Yet even at the height of her ascent, Ruslana stayed quiet. Her interviews were rare.
She kept a close circle, often retreating to her journal or slipping out early from castings. Some said she was shy. Others said she was just observing. But no one could ignore her presence. Photographers described her as having the kind of beauty you don't direct, you just follow. She could look straight into a lens and make it blink. Her features were symmetrical, but her energy wasn't. There was always something elusive behind the eyes, something unsaid. That mystery only made her more magnetic. In a world obsessed with trends, Ruslana was a timeless glitch, too unique to be duplicated, too ethereal to belong fully to the moment. And yet, she was everywhere. Magazine racks, billboards, salon posters. Her face became shorthand for a specific kind of enchantment, otherworldly but elegant, distant but never cold. In an era dominated by smirks and smolder, she brought back the blank, uncanny beauty of the early 2000s. British Vogue once named her a face to be excited about. But for all the momentum, something about Ruslana always felt like she was just passing through. Like she wasn't building a kingdom in fashion, just visiting for a time. No one knew that time would be so short. By early 2008, Ruslana Korshunova had everything a young model could dream of, and nothing that warned the world what was coming. She was on the rise again, fresh off campaigns with Paul Mitchell and Dior, shooting in Europe and planning to return home to Kazakhstan. Friends said she was upbeat, glowing even. Her MySpace page, a digital diary of the time, mixed cryptic poetry with snapshots from castings and travels. There were no signs, at least not obvious ones. But as always with Ruslana, the truth seemed to live between the lines. On June 28, 2008, just 3 weeks before her 21st birthday, Ruslana fell from the 9th floor balcony of her apartment building in Manhattan's financial district. The news struck the industry like a lightning bolt through glass. New York police ruled it a suicide within hours. No signs of forced entry, no letter, no evidence of struggle, just silence, and a shattered girl on the street below. But those closest to her refused to accept the official version. Her mother, in tears, told reporters she would never do this, never. Her friends backed her up. Ruslana had booked a flight to return home the next day. She had posted online just hours before her death. There was no history of depression. She had plans. She had energy. She was coming back. More troubling were the physical inconsistencies. One eyewitness claimed her hair had been cut, chopped unevenly, unlike her usual look, and with no explanation. Others noted bruises that didn't match a straightforward fall. Whispers started almost immediately. Did she jump, or was she pushed? And then came Rolls of the World, a mysterious self-help organization based in Moscow. Rolls of the World was known for extreme emotional training methods. It claimed to help people shed their ego, find their essence. But former participants described it differently. Something closer to psychological warfare, emotional breakdowns, isolation, and intense group manipulation. Ruslana had attended multiple sessions. After her last trip to Moscow to attend one of their seminars, friends said her personality shifted. She became distant, disconnected. She would write strange things online, like, "I'm so lost. Will I ever find myself?" And "The pain inside is unbearable." But when asked in person, she would laugh it off, call it drama or poetry. Journalist Peter Pomerantsev investigated Rolls of the World in 2011. He described their tactics as cult-like, comparing them to trauma-based control programs. One of his sources remembered Ruslana well. She was too fragile for them. Still, there was no direct proof, no note, no confession, only fragments. Even more chilling, in 2024, newly released documents from the Jeffrey Epstein investigation revealed flight logs listing Ruslana Korshunova on a trip to Epstein's private island in 2006, when she was just 18. There's no official confirmation of what took place, and she never spoke publicly about it. But the connection relit a firestorm of speculation. Why was a teenage model on that island? Did something happen there that haunted her? Was there a link between her sudden behavioral shifts, her involvement in roles of the world, and her death? Or was it all coincidence? A string of unrelated shadows orbiting a life that burned too brightly, too fast. The press moved on quickly. The fashion world whispered but didn't protest. In the weeks after, tributes poured in. A rare lights, an ethereal beauty, the one with the hair. But behind the elegies, the silence thickened. No one came forward with answers. The case was never reopened. Her body was flown back to Almaty and buried in the city she left behind. Her mother never believed the official version. Neither did her closest friends. And her fans? They're still asking the same question. What really happened to Ruslana Korshunova? Because the truth is, Ruslana didn't just disappear. She dissolved, leaving behind a trail of contradictions, a locked apartment, and a long fall that made no sense.
There was no comeback, no memoir, no final interview to explain it all away. In most supermodel narratives, redemption comes wrapped in applause, a runway return, a tell-all documentary, a triumphant rebranding. But Ruslana Korshunovan's story refuses that arc. Hers is a silence that echoes, not an ending, but an interruption. And yet, there is something redemptive in the way people still speak her name. Her friends have never stopped pushing against the easy answers. In online forums, anniversary posts, and private messages, they reconstruct her not as a cautionary tale, but as a soul caught between two worlds. They remember her laugh, her wit, her strange sense of humor. They remember a girl who loved poetry more than publicity, a model who didn't crave fame but stumbled into it and tried to keep her center as the industry pulled her in every direction. Some call it mystery, others call it tragedy. But perhaps Ruslana's quiet legacy lies in what she resisted. She never became a celebrity. She never launched a fragrance or dated a tabloid star. In a world that rewards noise, she remained a whisper, controlled, private, haunted maybe, but never performative. And she left behind questions that made people uncomfortable. Questions that suggest beauty alone does not protect you, that even in the brightest rooms, darkness can go unnoticed, that not all losses make sense, and not all stories get closure. If redemption means rewriting the script, maybe hers was written in invisible ink, hidden between the still frames of Fashion Week, the blurry candids, the lines of her poetry. Maybe her refusal to explain herself was the message. Or maybe she said everything she needed to say, and we just weren't listening. In an industry built on clarity, on perfect angles, immaculate lighting, and carefully constructed identities, Ruslana Korshunova remained unsolvable. She was not the next Kate Moss, nor a successor to Natalia Vodianova. She didn't fit into any frame. And that, perhaps, was her greatest legacy. She reminded the world that fashion, for all its surface obsession, cannot define the depths of a person. That a face, even one etched into billboards and editorials, can hold layers the lens will never catch. In an era obsessed with spectacle, Ruslana offered stillness. In a system addicted to reinvention, she remained untouched. She didn't leave behind a brand or a business. She left behind a question, a reminder that ethereal beauty often hides earthly pain, that silence can be louder than scandal, that some disappearances are not erasures, but echoes. Today, when people look back at the early 2000s, they might remember Ruslana as the Russian Rapunzel, the girl with the hair, the face, the mystique. But those who really knew, really saw her, remember more. A gentle mind navigating brutal rooms, a poet misplaced in an empire of noise. She wasn't the most photographed, she wasn't the loudest, but years later, hers is still the name that lingers. Because Ruslana Korshunova didn't just model clothes. She modeled something rare in fashion, vulnerability. And when she vanished, she left a void that beauty alone could never fill.